welcome to the session 6 of the second Eastern African Bioeconomy Conference, where we're going to be looking at how we're going to strengthen bioeconomy with a focus on financing. My name is Kanana Njuguna. I'm the moderator for this session. I'm a project catalyst at Growth Africa, where we, as CBC, we are the growth partner for entrepreneurs. We accelerate and provide business advisory support for entrepreneurs. And part of my passion has been in business incubation, supporting the bio entrepreneurs to be able to get commercialized, and also facilitating business mentorship and business advisory. To start us off and to set the pace for our session today, we have Dr. Katrina joining us virtually. And to introduce her, she's a Vice Director in Tracks Initiative at Chalmers University of Technology. And as a Vice Director, Christina has co-managed the development of education and learning environments within the Tracks Initiative. She has also served as a Project Manager, Director of Studies at the Department of Technology Management and Economics, and introduced a model of providing entrepreneurial experiences to students of all programs at Chalmers. She's also been a CEO of a biomedical farm that is based in Sweden. So over to you, Dr. Katrina.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today and inviting me to this session. I will share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. All right. So thank you very much for having me introducing this discussion panel on how to ensure successful bio-incubation, including the financing. So my name is Christina Henriksson-Briggs, as mentioned, and I work at Chalmers University of Technology in the city Gothenburg on the west coast of Sweden. I would like to start to talk just briefly about how we can identify biologically based technologies. And the first thing I'm thinking of is how difficult it is. If we think about venture capitalists, they have their task to identify new technologies, but they also have a business model where they actually kind of count on that they fail most of the times, because it's really, really difficult to know what new ideas are the ones that will become success stories. Although they have experience and knowledge, they also fail. And one thing that is, of course, good to remember is that the researcher or actual innovator is maybe not always the person who's most suitable to take a new idea to the market, to become the entrepreneur. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is that it's not enough with a good idea. It can look good and interesting, but we really need to do our homework. We need to have both experience and knowledge to understand an idea, to recognize it in the first place, but also to believe in it. So you need to look at the whole business case and the whole value chain. And this is the work you need to do, but who is going to do it? Could be an entrepreneur, it could be incubators at universities, TTOs, or others. And because this is a panel discussion, I also wanted to give some thoughts around that. Maybe it can also be organized in different ways. At the university where I work, we have worked for more than 20 years with incubation in a different way. We have a master's program where we use the students as the entrepreneurs. We combine them or connect them to researchers or innovators that stay as experts in the team. And we, in turn, support and teach our students to become entrepreneurs. Together, they evaluate, develop ideas, and if they're successful, they also start companies after the education is finished. And this has actually turned out to be very successful over time. This is not for everyone, but I just wanted to open up for alternative ways of also doing this. And then only a few words about business incubation that I would like to connect to my own research that I've done on business incubation in Eastern Africa. Business incubation or bioincubation is a word that could mean a lot, but I think a lot of people know approximately what we mean when we talk about it. However, there is a risk that we look too much on the definition of what it should be instead of looking at what needs do we need to support entrepreneurs with. In different contexts, entrepreneurs have different challenges. And this is more important to start from than looking at what should this business incubator include, what kind of services should it include. So instead of looking too much at the definition, we should start with what barriers we have in our local context and try to help the entrepreneurs to pass these barriers. Connected to this is how we get inspiration. It's always good to get inspired from other business incubators, bioincubators in the region or abroad. But again, there is a risk if we try to copy a concept that someone else has been successful with. I would say this is a common mistake we make in Sweden, where we like to look at the US and how they work in, for example, Silicon Valley. But we tend to forget that the cultures are very different. American people and Swedish people are very different. But also things like funding, like different types of resources are very, very different. And that's why it's very difficult to copy something straight from the US. Lastly, there are, of course, things that differ depending on the ideas. For the business incubator, bioincubator, some life science ideas, they really need different types of support in terms of, for example, a time aspect. Life science ideas can take a very long time to develop and take to the market, depending on what it is. And with that comes the financial aspect, of course. But there could also be other things like life science. The field needs publications, like scientific publications, maybe in parallel with developing a product or like a new technology. And that could also change kind of the needs for the entrepreneur. But with that said, I think I will leave the floor to the next to the panel. I'm really excited to hear the reflections on all these different issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Christina, for that very well put preamble to these discussions that we're going to be having. And to keep us rolling, we'd like to introduce a video that you'll be able to see on Vilgrow Africa and Uganda Green Enterprise Finance Accelerator, and then we will keep the ball rolling.
Bio-Grow Africa is really focusing on two things. On the one hand, how do we address the need for homegrown solutions for Africa's needs? And this is because we've realized that we have a huge problem of poverty. The second part of it is then be able to ask, how do we then take it to market in a way that it will reach our populations when it is still of high quality and also affordable? How do we achieve this through social entrepreneurship? And bringing our expertise in life sciences into that aspect of solving Africa's health challenges will continue to be a key focus for us as we scale up as Bio-Grow Africa. Then the other interesting and exciting possibilities are the other industries that are closely affiliated with the life sciences. Here we are looking at issues to do with food security. In Africa, we are still food insecure, primarily still importing a lot of the foods to sustain ourselves. How can we be able to support our small-scale farmers to be able to operate more or less like the way in the developed world we see industrialized farming happening? We're also looking at issues to do with access to clean water and sanitation. So SDG number 2 for food security, SDG number 6 for clean water and sanitation. And ultimately, we also need to be able to do so through partnership. We are scaling as Will Grow Africa by partnering with in-country incubators and accelerators. And these are people who already understand the country, they already have the partnerships there. They are working in tandem with academia, with government, with industry, with investors. And so ours is to be able to share our methodology as Will Grow. What has made us so successful in Kenya, what has made us so successful in East Africa, with the partners that we will be onboarding. And we believe that even in doing so, there's a lot of leverage in terms of having the networks beyond just the know-how. That's also a very critical ingredient for success.
A green enterprise is one that is focused on sustainability. So the Uganda Green Enterprise Finance Accelerator is a program that is fully funded by the European Union delegation to Uganda. And what we're doing is to see how can we support green SMEs access financing from partner banks. We are looking at 5 sectors. You have an enterprise in renewable energy. We are looking at sustainable tourism. We are looking at sustainable transport. We are looking at waste management and green manufacturing. And when you're accepted into this program, there are 2 elements to it. There's the non-financial component and the financial component. The non-financial component is that business advisory that we're going to give you for 6 months, well-defined operations and structure of how you're going about the growth of your organization. And then we are partnering with local banks. So when you've gone through this, we'll present it to one of our partner banks to give you a loan that we would have predetermined during the investment planning of how much are you looking to invest as an organization. Yes, discount means that we will immediately reduce the loan that the bank has advanced to you by a third. For example, if you take out $100,000, the GEFA will immediately pay the bank, not you, a third of that loan. That is $33,000 US dollars. Finding XY is an innovation center and business advisory firm where we focus on supporting local SMEs. Since 2017, we've handled over 1,000 enterprises from different sectors, all focused on addressing issues to do with sustainability.
We have the pleasure of having Mr. Edirisa Sembatia in the flesh. He's here with us in the panel. And as he actually has allowed us to use the word Eddie, that's how approachable he is. So Eddie is a man of many hats, as you can see. He's the founder of Finding XY, which is a not-for-profit organization providing business advisory services, investment and project consulting services. He's also the project lead for the video you've just seen talking about what support they give to the green enterprises. That is under the Green Enterprise Finance Accelerator, GFA, and which is a representative of the SEED program in Uganda. We'll call Eddie is actually our green financing guru at this point, and we'll be able to dig deeper into his expertise as we build up from what the session 5 has been about, what the youth have highlighted as their challenges when it comes to setting up their bio businesses. And then joining us virtually from Sweden, we have Dr. Ivar, who's a senior researcher at the Stockholm Environment Institute. And Dr. Ivar is of course, he has a very vast knowledge in this topic of bioresources. He has been a main architect in the founding of the Bio-An, which ran from 1999 to 2010, and to the founding of the Bio-Innovate, which has so graciously hosted us and convened this conference. And also him being a bioeconomy sage, as I would call him. He's passionate about global resources and especially Africa. How can Africa access modern bioscience? So welcome, Dr. Ivar. And to kick the ball rolling, I'll start with you, Eddie. And Dr. Christina alluded to this. We can get lost in the terminology of what is bioincubation. We are all familiar or might or might not be familiar with the word incubation, but now we have this new term that we're talking about that is called bioincubation. So maybe, Eddie, in very few words, what would this be to you? Because it's something, it's a facility that you have provided for the entrepreneurs. What would you say this is? And then we'll also take it back to Dr. Eva for your input on this. Yes, Eddie.
Bio-incubation, here you are looking at bridging the gap between biology and technology and the environment, and coming up with solutions of how you can create sustainability in that field for the benefit of the people, especially who are going to use some of these products or use some of the processes that you're working on. It's different from any other kind of incubation where you are not looking at things scientifically. So it's kind of a unique environment that requires a different kind of perspective to how you're going to work with the innovators involved.
And maybe to build up on that, from session 5, the youth kept talking about financing, and I want you to give us a snippet into what are the core services that you feel a bioincubator should provide or be able to provide to nurture and support the entrepreneurs who have these bioinnovations for them to go to the market. What are the core services you feel they require in addition to financing? Because definitely financing has come up over and over. So what other kind of services do you feel should be at the core of a bioincubator?
I think that is the common misconception, and you can never, every entrepreneur or someone who has something they want to bring into the market will tell you what they specifically need is financing. But for anyone to give you financing, there are certain things that they have to look at in order to give you that financing. Now, that is where most of the innovators possibly may need support. How do you justify an investment into your idea? Can it be accepted in the market? Does it have use in the market? Can it relate to the target people that you are looking at? Is it scalable? Is it something that can be scaled out in that it makes financial sense for the investor? And also you, the innovator, what are your qualities? How have you thought about this? Because the first thing any financier is going to look at is the quality of the person that is asking for this financing. Have you thought long term on the growth of this idea and what kind of support that you may need? Do you clearly know it on what you need to grow, or what you're doing? How are you going to grow what you're doing? So so people do need that kind of capacity development, which we provide, like in that program called UGEFA that you just shared, making sure that people have investable ideas, having a business plan, having an investor deck, having a financial projection, having a detailed, clear ask of what you're looking for and how the person who is going to invest in this will benefit in terms of impact and the returns from the investment.
Yes, thank you for that, Eddie. Dr. Eva, would you weigh in on that? Starting with what would be your definition, or what would you describe a bioincubator to be, and what would you see as the core services? In addition to what Eddie has mentioned, that there's, of course, the aspect of financing, but there's also the technical support that they would require in the sense of being able to be guided to see how their bioinnovations actually make sense in the market that they're actually seeking to take to. Dr. Eva? Dr. Eva, you are muted. Yes, you're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Kanana. Thank you very much for allowing me to say something about this. I think, to start with, I think if you look at Africa, you have this fantastic bioresource base, which is the foundation for the bioeconomy. But the key thing here, I think, is that far too little value addition is done. There's too much of that primary resource not being part of any value chain or any processing. So I think there, incubation and the bioeconomy, this is really the nutshell of the bioeconomy to me for East Africa, that the whole value addition process, both to waste, to primary resource, to residues, etc., etc. And in doing so, there's, as Eddie was saying, there's so many issues apart from the financing, which is the key bottleneck in a large sense. But there's also things like sustainability of these resources. What about new bio-based standards? Do we have a market for these new bio-based products or technologies that are up and running? Do we have certification standards? And in some cases, like in the case of Bioinnovate, there has been support in creating new certification standards and etc. And also sustainability frameworks, which are increasingly important when you talk about the whole bioeconomy as such. So I think the thing with the bioeconomy incubator or bioincubator is that it, to a large extent, it works like an ordinary incubator in a conventional incubator for many of the technologies. But if you look at it from the perspective of this conference, building a whole new economy, contributing to the SDGs, there's so much more aspects of incubation that comes into play. Apart from those Eddie was mentioning, then the certification, the whole market, the whole sustainability aspects, the job creation, the livelihoods issues. So there's also a lot of new demands, which also creates a lot of new opportunities for incubation, I would say. And you can think of incubation on several levels, but I think I'll leave it at this for the moment and allow you to move further.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, I think we are now getting an understanding of what it is that this unique thing that we're calling a bioincubator, that is not just a term that we are giving it, because the businesses or the entrepreneurs that come through that structure, what we are calling a hub, where there's the midwifery, where we're trying to get them from that state where they have the idea and getting them to take that to the market, is that now we've been able to see that it has different aspects to it that are important. And which takes me back to Eddie. When you're setting up a bioincubator, what are the available options for funding? And maybe we can look at it in two ways. For the bioincubator, if someone wants to set it up, because right now, listening to the youth, there's a need for this kind of nurturing, creating the right conditions for them to thrive. How would we, what's the financing like in terms of the incubator and also subsequently for the entrepreneurs?
Yeah, for an incubator, for a bioincubator, I think the first thing you're going to look at is the pipeline. How can you get pipeline for your incubator? And then it makes it very relevant for you to work with universities where you can get extensive research and innovation into how you can incubate some of these ideas. The other thing is how the process of the incubation that you're going to be taking these companies through, how have you structured your incubation? I think one of the biggest barriers we have now is very few people are actually financing innovation. So if someone wants to do a bioincubator, I think that's a good step. They will be stepping into a space that is not that hasn't been fully explored, especially in the East African context. But you need to be mindful as you build this pipeline as an incubator. How are you going to bring these innovations into the market? Which I believe then will be a different topic. But how are you going to bring these innovations into the market, and how are you going to make sure that these innovations are actually ready for the market? Yeah.
Okay. So for the entrepreneurs, would you give us a sort of a snippet into what kind of funders are actually waiting for them at the end of this process that you're taking them through. And I like that you've also highlighted a bit about the pipeline, and we'll pick up on that as we go along. But a bit of insight into who are these funders who'd be interested in these biopreneurs, and what ideally would they look for? What's the make or break for them to be able to invest in these entrepreneurs?
I think there are a variety of funders and people that can work in this space. It just really depends on what kind of results they are looking for. And these results are shaped by the impact, they are shaped by the risk involved in the innovation. Is it something that is acceptable to them, or is it something that doesn't tick some of their boxes? The other thing you can think about is the scalability of what you are trying to create. So different funders are going to come in the shape of the nature of the impact that you want to create, but also on the viability of the idea. So in this case, previously there was a focus on access to debt, access to equity, access to grants, access to mezzanine financing. But as we are doing in the green financing space, we are trying to bridge the gap between development finance and commercial finance. How can you bring this kind of financing together? Things like grants, for example, have denied us a lot of opportunities because they are very competitive by the nature of and how they are designed. But what we are thinking about is especially the issue of risk, because for investors, that whole due diligence that someone will ever do is really at the bottom line is to address the question of risk as the most important thing. So the kind of financing that we are currently working with, blending commercial finance with development finance, trying to bring things like concessional loans, returnable grants, because we are looking for sustainability in how you are coming about with this unicorn that you want to bring to the market. That kind of finance pushes entrepreneurs not just to tick the impact boxes, but to make sure that whatever they are doing actually works. Don't just give us a number that you have been able to serve 100,000 communities or 100,000 farmers. Tell us and show us that 5 years from now, whatever you're doing is going to be existing. So the nature of finance that we now consider is that kind of finance that can blend what is development, what is commercial finance, and of course it has to be concessional with a level of de-risking. You have now things like first loss facilities or second loss facility, or different kinds of approaches, or financing, or a loan that is tailored where you pay back based on the revenue that you're generating. So different players, investors, funders are coming up with these different kinds of approaches to make sure that whatever is being financed is actually sustainable in the long run.
Okay. And also, Dr. Christina mentioned in her introduction that science may take longer to get to the market. Are you experiencing your funders or investors who have that kind of patient capital that maybe wait out for the product for it to be developed and go through different phases until it can get to the market? Compared to the other kinds of products that would actually straight get to the market. So have you had an experience with that? Or is that something that you feel would be important to be able to have that kind of patient capital?
I think that slowness in distribution of capital is also because the people who are running these businesses are focused on the wrong thing. So for example, you come up with a unique technology or a unique formula, and you spend a lot of your time looking around for investors as compared to running the business. That is why you typically get that gap, especially in our ecosystem. You have a lot of people who are bent on getting investors to finance them, whether grants or other forms of financing, than they do on actually running their business. Because if any investor is going to come on board, the first thing they'll ask for is traction, right? They'll ask for the traction and seeing how you're developing what you're doing. And of course, in East Africa, we have a capital gap that is so huge. We don't have enough capital, especially for innovations. So our entrepreneurs have to be different from what you see in the Silicon Valley, where I'll just come, look at your patent and say, wow, I like your idea. I'm going to give you $1 million, push you from a Series A into Series B. We have, as entrepreneurs, we have to be more resilient because you have a capital gap and really focus on building the business in a cheaper way. Access the markets. We need to learn how to work with private sector in what we are developing, especially for the bioeconomy. We need to see how can we work with private sector to accelerate our innovations in order to justify the financing.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Maybe just a build up on that before then we can move to Dr. Eva in terms of the lessons that we can learn. Is you talked about there's an aspect of bootstrapping for these young innovators. And definitely when you're hearing and even listening to Wamboi and Jack and Alex earlier, is that you feel, the connotation that comes is if you have your bio-entrepreneur, there is something, you need like tons of equipment, you need a room full of these different kinds of assets. And maybe bootstrapping for them may feel a bit complex. So as you've been working at UGFA and finding XY, how have you been able to support these entrepreneurs to be able to bootstrap along that way before they can actually, be credible enough to come before investors?
Yeah, bootstrapping is a good term that can be applied in different way. Maybe what I can add to that is being a bio-innovator by its sense makes you a unicorn. So being a unicorn means you're special. So one of the challenges you have is innovators, and I know I may rub some people wrongly, innovators do feel special, right? And that comes out in the way you're actually going to run a business. Because the strength of bootstrapping is your ability to build partnerships. Right? I don't care how much you sacrifice to really invest into that business using your savings and wherever you're going to get capital. As long as you cannot build credible partnerships to push you along that journey, relevant partnerships, bootstrapping won't even make sense to you. So the strength of bootstrapping means building partnerships. Building partnerships means being able to listen and learn. Now, that is why sometimes you get a challenge with innovators, especially scientific innovators. Are you willing to learn? Or do you have this knowledge that you have that then becomes a blockade, to you learning? Because when you're moving from science, innovation into entrepreneurship, that is a whole different ballgame that you need to transition in and accept to learn. And it's not for everyone. That is why that mentality of building partnerships is really key. You don't have, as a scientist, you don't necessarily have to become an entrepreneur, but you can explore how you can build partnerships that can help you realize your dream or your goal or your innovation and seeing it in the market.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there's been the spanner in our works, the conversation we continue having about can an innovator become an entrepreneur? And also there's an aspect, I think earlier talking to one of the bio-innovators, they were saying that the hardest thing to them is communication. And so if they have to do bootstrapping and they have to do all these partnerships, which is pegged on how well they're able to communicate what it is that they do in a simple way to get the support, then again, these are conversations that then we're able to pick up as we go along. Dr. Eva, over to you. I know South Africa has already started on their, implementing the bioeconomy strategy. We have Europe that's already steps ahead. So what's your input in terms of what we're able to learn so that we're able to leapfrog, that as the East African bioeconomy strategy is being developed to be able to support all these innovations that are coming and taking them to the market and improving the East African bioeconomy, how do you recommend that we're able to learn and sort of like share our lessons between the different regions in Africa and elsewhere?
Right. Well, I think if you look at the US, for example, there's more than 100 bioincubators in the US, many, and there, of course, many of them are it's a mix of university and government funding, and also a lot of commercial funding, lots of venture capital. So that model is, of course, extremely effective, but it relies a lot also on huge, big grants, big incentives by the government, and also lots of risk capital or venture capital. And in Europe, it's a bit same, but maybe the venture capital side is a bit less. And if you look at South Africa and Brazil and India and China and so, I think also that the incubators that we see there has been developed largely also by the government. Government has invested in building incubating services and incubation. And what interesting enough, we heard from Ben Ben Durham yesterday that he told us in South Africa a lesson they learned is that government was pretty strong in developing by incubators and incubating and funding agendas as well. What incubators should focus on and what type of market they should explore and what type of actors should be incubated and so on. But now they've changed a bit and say that the private sector is important to have as part and parcel in the process and in the design of the incubation early on, to sort of explore the markets earlier, and what is it that the private sector want to invest in, what are able to grow. And there I think given that most of the incubation services in large parts of East Africa, I mean, they needs to be driven to a large extent by grants and by governments. But to get, I think a key lesson there is early on also get the private sector, engage the private sector actors early on, so that one sees where is the market, where do we have the ability to grow. And there, I think, Eddie, you mentioned something very important, that you have so much more of a mix in Africa of this blended finance, government grants from donors, from government, from development banks, and then you have a weaker but still active private sector, and then venture capital to some extent. But that gap there is a bit more challenging than in many parts of the world, to bridge that gap from development funds and government funds into commercial funds. But there, I think that, and you also mentioned something very important. I think that you mentioned partnerships, that these incubators are able to bring in partners, quite a wider range of partners that can bridge these gaps and allow you to make that journey from idea to the market. And I think that partnership concept, I think, is probably more important in Africa for African incubators than it would be in Europe or in the US or in OECD countries. And there you have to think of incubators who are able to sort of have this holistic view and bring in partners, be it from the development side, but also the commercial side, of course, so that all are able to fulfill their specific roles in this ecosystem, and that you're able to make that journey and possibly bridge that gap between seed funding, development funding into commercial funding. So I think that's some of the lessons. Another lessons I would like to bring up is that what we see from incubators, that one of the key assets or key issues is that you have skilled incubator personnel, so to say, incubator managers with a lot of business experience, of course, and scientific experience, but also experiences in developing these kind of development partnerships that you would see here, bringing in different actors with different type of different type of actors, donors and private sector actors, and that are able to sort of possibly more holistically, and not only from the business perspective, but also from a development perspective, see how these gaps could be bridged. So that sort of business, that incubator manager expertise, I think is a key thing, and something which I think the region could build on, could build a stronger base of incubators, managers. I think they are an important part of the puzzle here. And I think Eddie and will grow. Those are the type of XY and will grow are the type of incubators that needs to be built, and also Bioinnovate to a large extent. Bioinnovate being that broader incubator, bridging, also linking in different countries in the region, in these innovation consortia, but also bringing in other aspects like policy development, supporting regional bioeconomy strategy development, but also supporting certification standards, etc. So incubators with a larger, not only business specific, but with a larger portfolio of skills are important there as well. I think I'll stop there from the moment.
Yes. Again, maybe back to you before you mute. So a platform, I think you've also alluded to that, Bioinnovate has created a platform where there's communication that's happening between the different regions. I think that is something that then we can encourage, because there's a lot of lessons that we are hearing about, and we wouldn't want to experience the same pitfalls as other different regions have experienced as they roll out their bioeconomy strategy. So are there any other learning or cross-learning strategies that you would recommend in terms of being able to share what it is that the bioincubators in other different countries are doing?
Well, I think there is a growing number of bioincubators in the region, in East Africa now, that are struggling but are making progress, I think. So to me, it seems like there is also now maybe the possibility to build networks of bioincubators and share ideas on how to bridge these specific challenges that East Africa provides, and maybe that's something that could be done in a more sort of orchestrated way than has been done. That we have a network of incubators, so to say, that can share ideas specifically for that demanding or the specific circumstances of Africa when it comes to incubation. So I think that could be something to explore further for the region. And I'm not sure, Eddie, how much you talked with Robert and how much you talked with the Bioinnovate team there in terms of the challenges that you experience in your incubation, and the type of models that you have developed, which might be things that you could have a learning between yourselves there.
I just want to actually re-emphasize your point related to that on the quality of advice. A lot of times, an entrepreneur comes to you at a particular stage in their business, and you really wonder how they actually got to be in the situation where they are. And it's because of the kind of advice. I totally agree with Eva's point when he mentioned that incubators should have good advice, good managers that are skilled. The quality of advice is really key and central to how you're shaping the incubation. One time, recently, a lady came to me. She had she's an engineer, had started out her business in 2012 in agriculture. The business failed, and then she pivoted into financial services. Then it failed. now she had pivoted into a modified cook stove that is blended with solar. And when she went to get advice, and they gave her a loan to scale up the production of her cook stove. So she went and paid the technology supplier based somewhere in Europe, and the money wasn't enough. And what she was advised to do was to triple her loan. She was already in debt. She's not generating revenue, right? But the advice she's getting is that you need to dig deeper, go more, the product will work. It's not uncommon that you see so many businesses that are grant funded. For example, you have $1 million in grant funding, and your revenue doesn't even make up 5% of that. And yet you already scaled out in Rwanda, in Kenya. All that comes down to the nature of advice, because people think getting money will be the trick. It's not actually the trick. It's the capacity. For most of the people, especially coming up with unique innovations, sometimes there's a misconception of thinking that this thing that you have created is the business. But that is not actually true. The business is the infrastructure that is surrounding this. It's the paying customer. It's having a strategic direction in how you want to take your business. It's having clear processes of how you want to grow and operating. There are all these unique things that you have to look at to actually have a business. It doesn't end with you coming up with this uniquely placed innovation that is actually needed in the market. That's what really shapes a business. So if you are going to be innovative in how you are handling these innovations, it's the quality of advice, it's the commitment, that hand-holding. I'm happy with Bioinnovate and how they work with the enterprises, giving them that fast financing that can push you into the market. That hand-holding is key, because we have that high failure rate of businesses in Africa because you have that uniquely, because people do not get enough advice. You don't get enough direction and hand-holding to really help you make that critical transition for you to have a business that can now generate income, can sustain itself, and has the capability to grow.
I like the conversation that's going on now, that there's an aspect of time that I feel is coming up in terms of how do we help these young entrepreneurs, the startups, be able to appreciate that this process that you're being taken through is not, it's not like a 2-week kind of thing. Maybe Eddie, in your experience, what duration would you recommend from the time an incubatee gets into the bioincubator to the time when you can actually say they are sort of investment ready and you can actually take them in front of investors? What duration of time is this based on your experience?
I've met people who have been startups for 10 to 15 years. And that is not a good thing. For as long as I can remember, there are certain people that I know that have been startups for a long time. In that word actually loses sense and what it's supposed to mean. But there is no particular duration for how long you're going to be a startup. It really just depends on how willing you are to learn, to do the work that is necessary to see that your business is growing, and to utilize revenue very effectively. I think that is where most of the startups get a challenge, especially if you're receiving a grant. And sometimes where the grants are very necessary in our ecosystem, but sometimes where the challenge comes is if someone has never really generated money, right, and they receive a grant, you've tested money, it kind of also sometimes denies them of an opportunity of building that capacity to understand your market. You are suddenly thinking bigger than what you actually are because you have 500,000 that you have received. So it's very critical for you, if you're going to transition from simply being a startup to building, putting in the work, using your income, very effectively. When you receive these grants, do invest them for your runway and making sure that your company can run. Invest in the right things. Don't build your home. Don't buy the dream car that you've been dreaming of, and start creating receipts to lie to funders and give us false impact numbers. Do the right things, Invest in quality staff to work with you. If you know that you've received a grant of 100,000 and you're a weak entrepreneur, get a manager who is proven and they have a good track record, in this particular field. Invest in the business. Don't take the income out. If you take the income out, you'll be that startup that stays a startup for 15 years.
Thank you. I think you're all able to also follow the discussion on the platform. There's a lot of conversation that's going on in terms of the entrepreneur. Can they still, the innovator be the entrepreneur? And again, Eddie, at the risk of going back to you, there is also an aspect that's come up in terms of the IP. How do, the young researchers, how do they navigate that in not about taking it to the market? So I hope you're also able to follow the conversation. You can also post your questions online. For those of us who are joining us virtually and the team that is here, then I'll be able to see your comments as we go along. Maybe to go to Dr. Christina. You have been able to introduce entrepreneurship to students. And maybe I'd like to pick from your experience, how has this been when especially, the youth earlier mentioned that they feel, yes, they're in the bioeconomy, they're in the technology areas of expertise, but they've never really thought they could tie that to entrepreneurship. So what has been your experience about that? Is it something that they already feel they can do? I mean, entrepreneurship always feels like it's a straight line. Has that been your experience as you introduced entrepreneurship to the students at Chalmers?
Thank you. No, not at all. It's not a simple journey. I would say that we admit students, so they're selected in a way, and they're very ambitious and driven. But it's very important that you work hard, and as has been mentioned here, I think it's a very interesting discussion. The expertise and knowledge still needs to be there in some way. So you can't just create entrepreneurs out of kind of anyone. You need to support them quite a lot and give them the tools and the kind of help them to understand how to understand business management. I mean, of course, financing, all of these different parts. But what's the advantage, I guess, is that our students have kind of a safe environment where they can practice this during the education. So that's probably the main difference. If you're young and you need to kind of learn as you kind of develop your company, but it's not an education or any other safe environment, that's a different thing, definitely.
Thank you so much for that input. Definitely, there's a sense that the startups, there's a call for them to actually be very resilient. And then, then the bio-incubator that we're seeking to strengthen, that as much as we're focusing on the aspect of financing, how is the incubator supported to be able to open its doors and, give this very expensive mentorship and technical support that the startup requires. Then also there's the aspect of the entrepreneur themselves. What kind of team do they have? Eddie has alluded to it, that the investor is also looking at the composition of who it is running that business and how much time they put into it. Dr. Eva, to maybe get your insight in terms of all the lessons that we are learning. There's a lot that we have discussed. How are we able to, to adjust and adapt this to our context? Is there a need to be able to contextualize at all? Or is there a solution that's a plug and play? is it safe to assume that South Africa has a bioeconomy strategy that we can just plug in and play?
No, no. I think you really have to contextualize both the strategy and the type of incubation done in East Africa, and also country-wise. There's different country context as well. So I think really what we have mentioned in the sense that a bit is that you have the incubator and you're incubating services, but there are also a need, I think, for the more physical incubator where things can be tested out, like with equipment, with staff that can help you to sort of, if you have a value addition thing you want to test if the concept works, and you can't sort of invest in a big type of equipment for that. You need to buy, but you can maybe go to a center or a biohub or agro development center or a physical center to test out your ideas. So there's and those type of centers, of course, in Europe and the US, they're plentiful, but in Africa they're very scarce. There are very few of these physical incubators where things can be tested out and where pilots can be done. So I think that's something which needs to be developed, and possibly government and donor fund needs to come in as well. So I think that's a specific thing that what needs to be built up, and also I think what Ed was saying there, but that goes for many incubators. And many of the researchers that we do have and are starting up, they have also they're in the research mind. They think, now we have this fantastic product, fantastic technology, and then they work on the technology, but maybe not on the businesses and generating incomes. So that's where the partnerships comes in and the business skills comes in. How do you develop your business case, and how do you make money, and how do you ensure sustainability of your investment? And that's maybe something which needs to be strengthened in many of the incubators that we do see in East Africa. I think the mixture of where you need strong donor finance and government funding to get things started, and a private sector which is fairly risk averse and doesn't have that much ability to take risks, is a very complex and demanding environment for incubator. But that's how one needs to operate. Which brings me in the sense that maybe also we have to look beyond, in a sense, the whole bioeconomy needs to go from small scale. If it's going to make an impact, we have to industrialize the bioeconomy in East Africa, and how to make that really large scale. And that's an issue where you might want to partner with already established companies, international companies that might come in and link with your incubator and link with your platform. And there, I think a platform like Bio-incubation is fantastic, because there you have all the actors, the researchers, you have the private sector, you have the international context, and you're building a platform that might be able to also attract investment from or interest from other international companies, linking in with a particular idea or a particular technology, scaling it up, because that sort of scaling up experience is largely lacking, I think, in most parts of Africa. We think of small scale, but how to go from small scale to medium and large scale, and that's in South Africa, and more so in US and Europe. There you have the companies, and they're able to run with the ball and take it to the market and commercialize it. But in East Africa, and that's a bit of a bottleneck. That sort of, you go to a pilot, you have a small scale system, but how to scale it up, and is our bioincubators that we do have, are they ready? Do they have the skills to sort of link in and partner with these larger industrial actors, possibly in Europe and the United States, or in South Africa or India?
Okay, so Dr. Eva, I would want you to weigh in on what the importance is in terms of having regulations and standards in place, as well as we are supporting these startups. to the point where we're able to avoid what we would call sort of that consumer confusion. Would you have an example to share in regard to that? How the bio-innovations can be standardized, even as we think about taking them to the market, because then we also need to know what are the consumer trends, what is the customer at the very end looking out for, and are they already inclined to make the purchase towards bio-based product?
Yes, I think looking at in Europe, I think sometimes there's a consumer confusion here that there's so many standards. You have buy local, you have ecological, organic, you have climate friendly, climate smart. You have so many different type of labels. And in Africa, I think that and there's the possibility when we develop the bioeconomy to build a narrative around the bioeconomy that what you do is you build on your biological resources, you add value to all that, you optimize the use of bioresources, and you do it in a sustainable way. You're creating livelihoods, you're creating jobs, you grow the economy, and it's all part of contributing to the SDGs. And if one as an incubator can build that narrative around a bio-based product, and there's where communication comes in and marketing, that this is done. It's done on a local resource. We do it in a way that we are contributing to the environment. We are not degrading any ecosystem. We're actually improving ecosystem services. We are creating new livelihoods. Then that could be goodwill that could be created, a narrative around these bio-based products. And then the question is there a need for a specific label or a certification? Certainly there's a need of a lot of certification for different type of bio-based products, for biopackaging material, bio-based health products, which are to some extent lacking today. But there's a need, definitely, the regulators and the government has to do their homework, I think, apart from enabling larger markets, trade barriers, etc. There's also agreed certification standards for bio-based products, so they can be traded between countries. Is extremely important, I think, for the region. But there's also the communication around why do we this bioeconomy? What is it? What's the purpose of it? Are we contributing to development? And if you're as a bio-incubator, like in a sense like Bioinnovate, building a case around creating sustainable growth for Africa through using bio-innovations, that story and that narrative could somehow be used in also market a product and developing some type of principles, in a sense. Maybe you can call it principles of doing bioeconomy incubation, and so there's a lot of goodwill that could be capitalized and maybe also expressed also in terms of marketing. But if it's practical to do a certain labeling and certain certification, that I'm not sure of. I think that's like climate smart or climate friendly or organic. I think maybe I think the market in Africa is complex, and I think with the urbanization there's maybe an increasing interest of buying things local, but consumers have to be also assured that by buying local, this is also a sustainable production behind it, and I think that type of incubation and that type of communication from an incubator could be, and from that company being incubated, is a crucial thing to build on.
Yes, thank you so much for that valuable input. Definitely, we can feel there is a sense to have a value chain of activities happening, even as we get in the incubatees through the bioincubators. There's a lot that can either be championed through the bioincubator and other different stakeholders from the private and the private sector, from the public and the private sector, to be able to already prepare the way for these entrepreneurs who are getting into the market and for the innovation that they have. And maybe I know we could actually take longer in this session. But if we were to sum it up, maybe in one sentence, what would be your key message? Starting with Dr. Christina, then we can go to Dr. Eva, and then we can conclude with Eddie. What would be your key message in one statement?
Thank you very much, but that's a challenge. One sentence, you said. I would say, starting from the local context, talking to the entrepreneurs, what the challenges are, to really adjust the support that they need, but also kind of build it on the conditions that are the local conditions, not trying to do anything that is just ideas about financing maybe, or coming from abroad. I don't know if that made sense. Trying to make it into one sentence, but really starting from the local context.
Okay, yes, a needs assessment to be able to know what to provide in the bioincubation and to be able to contextualize it. Dr. Eva?
I think the key here, is partnerships, and I think Eddie expressed in a sense as well that there's this ability to bridge that strong influence of donor funding to also bridge that into commercial funding. There you need a lot of partnerships and a lot of sort of holistic thinking on how that could be done. So and that boils down to that we need a whole cadre of very able bioincubators, which I think is a key here, and I think they're there, and they need to be given more resources to more incubators and more incubator managers in the region.
Yes, thank you so much. Of course, definitely, we don't want to unpack the box about the incubator sustainability. Before Eddie gives his remarks, for those who are online and those who have questions, you can keep putting that at the question and answer tab. We will be moving to those shortly. And then also maybe highlight a few of the points that have come up in the discussion tab also. So Eddie, in one statement, maybe I can allow you to, you're working directly with the incubators. So what would be your key statement? What's your key message in regard to strengthening the bioincubation?
I'll give two, if you don't mind. One for the incubator, one for the for the entrepreneur. So for the incubator, the incubator has to accept that they are going to have a failure rate, but that failure rate has to be acceptable. Not every idea that one gets or innovation actually works. That is a fact. So you have to accept that. And that's the risk of working in the startups phase, is that you're always faced with that challenge. Not every idea is going to work, so have expect and have a reasonable failure rate. And to the innovators, it's two things. Number one is to do the work. It doesn't end with the innovation. Actually, the actual work starts with the innovation, because you want to create this impact. You want to see how people's lives are transformed, how processes are changed, how waste is reduced, and whatever kind of impact that you think about. So do the work. Be prepared to do the work, and of course, do the right things in how you're doing this work. I think those are key things for the innovators.
Thank you so much, Eddie. That from the conversations, even online, I can see that they've appreciated the practical examples, the very practical challenges and the opportunities that you have seen as you've worked with the biopreneurs. There's a question here. I think Kennedy has started a conversation about Bio-incubation and how it harnesses entrepreneurial potential. But then there's a question about who is a better mentor to these startups. Is it the business operator, the scientist, or the policy advisor? So I think anyone on the panel can weigh in on that. Who is a better mentor to this entrepreneur? And I know Professor Mshandete said he's been a coach for these startups. So who's the better mentor for these entrepreneurs? The business mentor, the business operator, or the scientist, or the policy advisor? Dr. Eva, you sounded like you were about to.
No, I would say the business operator, in a sense, would be the mentor. But I think a business operator with that holistic view of knowing the political and the policy environment, but also the science behind it, and also, as I pointed out, the which I think is a key thing, the sustainability aspects of it, and are we doing the right thing here, and are we investing in the right thing? And I think that sort of connects a bit to the but I think that there is a lot of capital out there. There's a lot of green capital out there that and there's a lot of potential. But I think one key is to have accountability and transparency in these incubation processes. And if that can be shown, this, and as you said, Eddie, doing the work, and if that doing the work can also be visualized, that we are making impact and we are transparent about it, we are accountable for it, then I think these incubation services could also be financed and be funded, and by there's a lot of philanthropic funds, so there's a lot of funds out there to be used, but we need to do the right thing.
Yes, indeed. We definitely need to do the right thing. And as we've talked about the need for policy, yesterday there's a statement that politics is stronger than science, and everyone keeps mentioning that there's a need to have that goodwill. And of course, the youth here will tell me, how do I go, and just demand that there has to be this regulation. And I think when we're talking about the strengthening the bio-incubation, then those are aspects that we can see. Which are these bodies that come together to be able to give this push for this regulatory support that is required. Then there's a question here that many incubators are attending to university graduates, especially when it comes to bioeconomy and bioinnovations. That then can there be a need for have those community incubators that are looking at entrepreneurs who are not based at the university, that they can actually be open. So I don't know whether, Eddie, you'd have a comment in terms of your pipeline. You said you get from the universities. Have you had others who have not come through the university?
Yeah, we do have people coming from different backgrounds. The setup of the incubator really is shaped by the need of that ecosystem. If it's a township or a rural kind of setting, and what kind of business activity or entrepreneurial drive or spirit is there. You can, they're not only in universities, but you have township incubators, you have communal incubators, especially done by the government usually. But it really just depends on what is the context in that environment. But we do get people coming from even outside incubators. Yeah.
Okay. And then maybe you could also, for anyone who may be listening in and they'd want to know, how would I join, a bio-incubator? What do I need to have, as the bare minimum to be able to join this program for support as an incubatee in a bio-incubator? What are the key selection criteria? Where would they need to? Is it an application they need to do? What do they need to have?
I think with our program, it's we put out a call for application where you can apply, and you see the criteria on there. There's a specific criteria. If you don't check one of the boxes, then don't apply, because most people go ahead and apply anyways, despite not checking some of the boxes. So there's a call for applications, but we also do open advisory to the businesses based on what you need. If you really think that you need that capacity development and you have that drive and you want to be entrenched into the network, we always invite people to contact us anytime.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope that information has come across clearly. Dr. Christina, as I open up the floor to anyone who is in person here, in case they have a question in regard to this session that we've had, Dr. Christina, in maybe a minute or less, just snipe it into an incubator and its sustainability. Is it possible, or will it never happen, and we just need to be able to get support for a bio-incubator to continually remain open, because then we'll have the failure rate that we will expect, and the startups don't have anything much that could actually give us in return at that point. Maybe, unless they do something to, pay it forward. So maybe Dr. Christina, in a minute or less, just an input into bio-incubator versus its sustainability. And then also I'll be waiting for questions from the floor here.
Thank you. There are different ways of running business incubators or bio-incubators, and one way could be to ask the companies for shares in the companies as a payment model. So there are definitely models where you could kind of also have a business model around a bio-incubator, which possibly could make it more sustainable, because then you hopefully get some kind of income if the companies turn out to kind of grow and work sustainably themselves. However, that's also a risk. If the companies are not surviving, then you won't get much income from them either, if they're not sold after a certain time. It could also be a sign of, I guess, quality. If we support you in this incubator, we kind of believe that we're supporting you that well, that your company will grow and we will all make money from this business. But yeah, so it's possible to have like a business model around it. But I guess most incubators, they don't have that. They have soft funding, yes, as funding.
Yes, so definitely that's a conversation that we need to carry forward and engage different partners in terms of how to ensure that our incubators are able to, in a way, still remain open, because when they face challenges of remaining open, then the startups do not have this opportunity to get that kind of support. Yes, there's a question right here. You can pass the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Kevit Desai. I'm the Principal Secretary for the Ministry of EAC and currently the Chair for the East African community and its coordination activities. Mine's more a comment, having listened to all the contributions by the panelists and on the questions that have been asked within this conference. And it's more towards assuming that there is a market, assuming that the East African community has 170 million people, and there's a possibility that Congo will be joining us. That's another 100 million people. That's 270 million people, which means that there's a sizable market to try everything. And assuming that this market exists, then what are the three elemental issues that need to be focused on, having heard from yourselves? Indeed, one of them is an incubator is like an SME, an MSME, and therefore requires a dedicated ecosystem for it. It requires a dedicated policy for it, because it's not comparable to larger organizations. They work differently. Multinationals have these networks which are international, and therefore are able to leverage from one another. So the most important issue here is that a resolve has to be made from such a conference to work together towards making an SME incubation policy within the East African community space. And this will then facilitate all manner of facilitation from, registering a bioeconomy business to the special treatment and incentive that it requires in order to take risk and mitigate risk in its value proposition to survival, but most importantly, its ability to be facilitated by way of ensuring that its taxation and its capacities are harmonious to its development, together with its ability to access services and access local content and access markets within governments. After all, the East African community has 6 governments, and therefore 60% of that market is usually government. And so this is critical to develop. Secondly, it is absolutely critical that, for a long time in East Africa, we think of supply-driven, which means, we're constantly trying to see how we can put our best and most genius people into the most roughest terrain and hope that they'll survive. But what we need to look into as a conference, as a community of bioscientists, is how do we ensure that we create the markets? How do we create an honest market, which is so clear that, an entrepreneur finds it motivational to actually wake up in the morning and enter that market. And what does that mean? We need to look at markets from a paradigm shift. We need to look at these as from a systematic perspective. We need to address policy constraints, policies, issues of policies, legislations, the regulatory environment, the standards, so that an entrepreneur is able to link to this favorable condition, which is absolutely clear. But we at the same time need to find mechanisms to promote greater coordination, innovation, capacity development, skills transfer, and the ability for us to promote that entire systematic approach. Now, whose responsibility is it? It can't be delegated to anyone. It can't be delegated to the scientists. It can't be delegated to the policymaker, for example, myself, or it can't be delegated to the entrepreneur. I think it's a collective effort to ensure that we systematically address those elements to an extent that it appeals to the 2 most important things for an entrepreneur. The first is predictability. He wants to wake up in the morning with a predictable ecosystem in front of him so that he can put his best foot forward and invest. The second is the ability for him to innovate on policies, legislations, and regulations, to differentiate, to ensure that he's able to be unique within this market systems. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, this needs to be seen from an end-to-end ecosystem. If you see it in fragments, then it'll never link up. And it needs to have that community and society approach towards playing that necessary coordination, choreography, and communications, and that collective ability to champion. And I think that these are the 3 elements, that I can conclude on, having listened to you and seeing that you are struggling to appreciate as to do what next. But it's absolutely clear because there's a value proposition, if I draw your attention to the 170 million people who require this potential. But we need to do a lot more together towards promoting that solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that well-put comment and observation. I mean, definitely it gives hope to know that beyond here, there's a lot that can be done. There's a systematic way to approach this and actually to work together. So it doesn't always feel like the entrepreneurs are being pitted against the policy makers, and it's all a whole back and forth. And also just the excitement of knowing, I'm sure, Eddie, you know what it means to feel there's potential in a market. I'll pick more questions from the floor, but we have run short of time. And I know if I pick a question, I don't think anyone will speak in a minute or less. You promise? Yes. Okay, one last one in just a minute.
Thank you. Rocio Diaz from Stockholm Environment Institute, Africa Center. I put a message to Cristina on the discussion section, but maybe she has not been able to see it. What are the possibilities of joining, for example, other incubators that exist also both in Europe and also here in East Africa. For example, KIC, the Knowledge Innovation on Climate Change. So they actually put incubators for projects on climate change. And I think it could be very good to link them also with what we have here in bioeconomy. In the EU, I think there are many things that are starting to be joined to make it more strategic. And I think that here there are several organizations that can do the same, trying to link bioeconomy with the wider issues, particularly with climate change. And I think that it has been actually mentioned during the COP meeting in Glasgow. So I just wanted to know your opinion on EVARS. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Christina, pretty quick.
Very quick. I think it sounds like a very good idea. I mean, we are involved in the different KIC initiatives at my university, so I know about them like that. But I think it's a very good idea. I'm sorry that I didn't reply earlier. I've been involved in the discussion here.
Okay, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I know we have been pressed for time, but there's been a lot of valuable nuggets and a lot of spanners in the work that have come up in this discussion. And definitely our very capable partner, Bioinnovate, is still going to be able to guide us in this process. And just to recap some of the key things that have come up in terms of strengthening the bioincubation, is it's critical that the partnerships all come from the private and the public sector, and they all work together to be able to, set up the right structures from an end-to-end perspective, that we're able to guide these biopreneurs who we are looking to incubate, for us to be able to strengthen our bioeconomy. And another key thing that has come up is being able to champion that SME incubation policy, so that subsequently, as we have other platforms to cross-learn, that there will actually be build-up of discussions that we have had, and there's already a framework set for us to be able to support these incubators that are very, very important, that the importance of them that we cannot deny. Then that the bioincubation needs to be well-structured, needs to have expertise that is from the business end and the scientific end. So there's need for also the incubators to be really well structured. They have the right funding, they have the right staff who are going to be there, they have the right equipment for them to be able to welcome these incubatees and be able to support them for the duration of time it takes for them to be able to get to the market. So thank you so much for tuning in. For those who've been online and for those who've made it to be here in person, we are grateful for that session that we have had, and the conversations continue on how to strengthen our bioincubation. Thank you so much to my very experienced panelists and very happy and excited panelists. I can see Dr. Eva is raising his hand. Thank you to Eddie for coming and for sharing so passionately from what it is that you do, working with entrepreneurs and giving them that financing to be able to get into the market. Dr. Christina, thank you so much for the support that you continue giving the entrepreneurs, even while they're at the university, to be able to appreciate entrepreneurship and innovation in regard to the biosciences. Dr. Eva, your expertise, we cannot even begin to unpack it here, but your passion for Africa, we hope that continues as you continue to give us your insights in terms of your research and opinions in strengthening the bioincubation. I don't want to lock you off. You're really smiling, and it's hard to say no to someone who is smiling. Okay, 1 minute or 30 seconds.
I just wanted to say thank you, and there was a lot of good questions there that we need to sort of think about in the region. And I just want to say that part of the bioeconomy strategy talks a lot about this enabling environment where the policy also for the bioincubators is really part and parcel.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there's a question for Eddie, but then this will be taken. I think Chira will advise how we are going to be able to still get the questions answered. So to Gloria, who's asked the question, we have taken note of it, and we will find a way of getting a response to you. Okay, over to Chira. Thank you for this session.